Okay, so I'm going to read a short excerpt from my fiction piece, Scar Tissue. I hustle toward the entrance of the mall to escape the lashing Wisconsin rain at my back. My nose nearly strikes the dirty, rain-peppered glass of the automatic sliding door before it finally grinds open, like an old piece of rickety wooden furniture being dragged across even older floorboards. I wonder then how often sliding doors break down, and, more importantly, how often people walk face first into them as a result. That's sad, isn't it, putting so much faith into the belief that these kinds of things are supposed to work, that they will always work, that we ignore every little twinge of common sense in our bodies telling us not to walk into the wall of glass. And what do we say after we've embarrassed ourselves? I'm disappointed in this door because it was supposed to open when I approached it. Yeah, that's sad. My breath feels like cold needles in my lungs. I labor through the food court just beyond the mall's entrance. Each step I take emits a watery squeak from my sneakers, so I try to walk lightly, easier said than done, to the point that I'm nearly tiptoeing. Yet the sound does not diminish. The food court, a pastel wasteland of yellow tables and chairs, hasn't a single patron. In fact, only one restaurant is even open, Chang's Chinese food. Plates of orange chicken, fried rice, and mushu pork that smell a day old fester beneath heat lamps. A young teenage boy wearing thin plastic gloves stirs the rice with a finger. The gloves don't make the act any better. A small waiting area past the food court with couches laid out in the small shape of a square encloses a small play area for kids. A little boy climbs over a giant plastic cupcake as another boy screams at him from atop a giant ice cream sandwich shaped like it's melting into the floor. There's a giant apple nestled in the corner as well, and although no kids are playing on it, I think it's nice the options available. I try to sidestep a couple of kids chasing each other in a circle, but a young girl bumps into me anyway. She looks shocked when she sees me, says "excuse me, sir," and then continues on after her friends. I stumble toward a video game store, stopping briefly to wipe my feet on the thick black rug at its entrance. A cardboard cutout of a soldier adorned in blue body armor stands like an idol before me. His arms cradle some sort of laser gun that he's pointing at the ground, where his right boot grinds into the skull of some hideous alien that he's dominated. I roll my eyes and enter the store with a wary stride, as if I needed to be evident I don't belong in such a place, and start looking for a present for my brother's 14th birthday tomorrow. I skim through the rows of games, all promising unbridled action and mind-boggling graphics, while a weather alert loops over the store's PA system for a few minutes, cautioning that severe thunderstorm warnings are in effect for the next couple of days. When the announcement finishes, it dawns on me that I have no idea what kind of games my brother likes. Definitely not sports. He hates sports. He'd probably like the game that the blue spaceman represents. That seems like the kind of thing I would have been into at his age. I turn my attention to the small woman with dusty brown freckles clerking behind the counter. She's wearing a Nirvana t-shirt and has red electric hair that gravitates off her head toward the cellophane wrapping of the video games on display behind her. Another customer occupies her attention, a young man that looks to be a few years younger than me, probably about 25, wearing a plain white polo, khaki pants, and tennis shoes. His body jolts uncontrollably every few moments, and as I listen to his voice and watch his gesticulation, I know immediately that there is something wrong with his mind. He waves the game above his head and asks the woman if she will hold it for him until his mom can come in and buy it. The woman sighs. I can tell she's dealt with him before, and firmly tells him no, and that he needs to put it back until he has the money. This doesn't sit well with the man, and he begins to stomp his feet and howl in the shrill voice of a small child. He says that someone else will take the game before he can make it back with any money, and then he throws the plastic casing across the store. It strikes the wall next to me and lands neatly beside my left foot. The clerk yells at the man to calm down. I pick up the case and inspect the cover. It is a used game with frayed packaging. A muscular man stands at the base of a mossy brown cliff. He has beautiful brown skin and golden blonde hair that lolls over his shoulders. A long red tunic stretches just beyond his groin, but he's wearing no pants. He brandishes a large broadsword encrusted with diamonds and rubies above his head. Next to him, a brunette woman wears 2 pieces of brown cloth like a swimsuit and wields 2 silver battle axes like hairbrushes. Above them, an elderly clad man in a purple robe stands at the precipice of the cliff. A white beard and pointy hat accent him perfectly. In his left hand, he holds a staff imbued with fire, and his right hand stretches outward like a clawed eagle, the tips of his fingers spitting blue lightning. Looming over the wizard is a slinky green dragon coiling its scaly body around the words "Dungeon Voyages." No one would ever buy this game, I think. And then I look back at the young man who's now sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of the counter. He runs his fingers violently through his hair and mumbles gibberish to himself. It occurs to me that there is no God. And then I'm going to read a quick excerpt from my nonfiction piece called Harvesting Animals.
Yeah, I should have pointed out, if I had been a good MC at all, Brian won first place in 2 divisions in the undergraduate categories, fiction and nonfiction. So,
On my 7th birthday, my father said it was time. I was ready to go on the deer hunt with him that fall. I had been ecstatic, to say the least. The rest of the summer was all about preparation. He took me shopping for all the essentials: a backpack, boots, winter gloves, rain pants, safety orange sweaters and beanies, and thermal underwear. We bought everything 2 sizes too big so that I could grow into them. But even as I grew older, I honestly can't remember a time when I had hunting clothes that actually fit me. Because in later years, I just wore my father's old things and I never quite filled them right. The weekend before the opening day of the hunt, he took me to an outdoor shooting range to watch him sight in his rifle. There were at least a dozen other men there doing the same last-minute preparations we were. I squeezed my green earmuffs tightly against my ears as shot after shot pierced the air of the small concrete bunker we were crammed into. My body stopped jolting with surprise after the first 2 volleys or so. I watched through my binoculars as the paper targets stapled to wooden stands at the other end of the range, which was just a deep ravine cut into the hillside, became riddled with bullet holes. The metallic tang of the heated rifle barrels hung in my nostrils as dozens of shell casings rattled across the cement floor, the tiny brass cylinders still emitting heat beneath my boots minutes after they'd been discharged. After my father fired 5 times or so, he looked over his shoulder and gave me a thumbs up. His whiskers, already turning white by then, shone beneath the sun, creeping in through the apertures at the front of the bunker. "Do you want to shoot?" he asked. His words sounded like they were being funneled through a heater vent to my vacuum and closed ears. I shook my head almost immediately, trembling just at the thought of taking 1 step closer to the red line that signaled "do not cross" during live fire. The range instructor had beaten that one warning into my head for 5 minutes before I was even allowed to walk out of the gravel parking lot. Even though I'd been yearning to fire a gun for months and had willed for my plastic rifles to be real when I played in the backyard, shooting one now after seeing and hearing their power for the first time seemed beyond my capability as a 7-year-old. And I was right. But my father insisted. "Come on," he said, leading me by the hand to the resting rifle on the table. "You can do it." It was clear to me then that I had to prove myself to him, prove to him that I wasn't my sister. I stepped up to the wooden bench and climbed onto the 2 pillows he had set out for me to sit on. I could still barely reach over the table to cradle the rifle, which was nearly as tall as me in my arms. My father leaned over me, positioning the stock of the rifle firmly against my shoulder, and then whispered into my ear the fundamentals of shooting. Take deep breaths, line the crosshairs on the target, keep both eyes open if possible, and squeeze, don't pull, the trigger. My heart thumped, my arms prickled with sweat, and my body quaked as my index finger hovered near the cool metal of the trigger. I trembled so hard that the stock of the rifle slipped from the groove in my shoulder. My father didn't notice, and I was too scared to tell him. I waited, and then I waited some more. "Come on, Brian," he said. "They're waiting to call a ceasefire. You need to shoot." I felt I had no choice. I closed both eyes, completely ignoring the target, and yanked the trigger backward. The uncontained stock of the rifle recoiled into my right cheek. The rifle fell from my grip to the table with a thud as I reached my hands to my face, throbbing now with violent pain. Tears flooded my eyes and nose, and screams welled in the back of my throat. My fingers tenderly prodded at the bump growing larger by the second beneath my right eye. Finally, my screams broke free from whatever had contained them to that point, and I began to sob with abandon, dedicating every ounce of my energy to reacting to the pain. "I'm sorry," my father said. "You weren't ready for that." He took me tightly into his arms, muzzling my face against his chest. My nose, wet and clogged with mucus, stung from the scent of his cologne and aftershave. I cried harder, and he squeezed harder until my sobs were bottled back in my throat from the lack of oxygen. A new kind of terror, much different than the fear I felt moments before while shooting the rifle, seized my small body, and I pounded on his back to release me. Back then, I didn't understand why I had been so afraid of his embrace, but now, lucidly within my memory, I can see the judgmental faces of the men around us who had seen what happened, and I can see my father's face, his cheeks burning red with humiliation beneath his stubble, and I wonder where, in that stifling hug, his compassion ended, and his embarrassment began.